Hi guys, and welcome back to another video here on David's PC channel. This video is the introduction to my series on Blender, in which we're going to look at different features of Blender, start building things, and I'm going to try and teach you all the knowledge that I have, and at the same time try to become better and improve my skills at Blender and my skills at making tutorials. In the background right now you can see one of the works that I've done, and I've actually completed it for a school arts project. And it's far from perfect, but it's just showing that I can actually do something with it and not just make videos. And this video is going to be kind of long, so bear with me while we go through different process or different steps of Blender which you have to know in order to use it. Some of which involve just downloading it and understanding how Blender works, the different window views, edit and object mode, and such things. So in the description below I'm going to have time marks where you can skip through different parts in case you want to skip a part or go back and replay one. And this is it for the introduction, so stay tuned for the next parts. So in this section of the video, I'm going to show you guys how you can get the latest and greatest of Blender, and possibly even some custom modifications that have been done by users and just freelance developers to Blender, because it is an open source software and you don't have to pay a cent for it. There's these great advantages that they're updated every day possibly. And if you feel that Blender is a great program, you can donate to them, but I'm not going to cover this in this video. Just keep that in mind, that they do need some money sometime, and that's a great way to contribute. So the way you're going to get Blender on your machine is by basically going to blender.org, and I'll have all the links that I use in the description below also. So you go to blender.org and you hit on the download tab. On the download tab, you can easily see that there's 32 and 64-bit versions of Blender for Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. OS X to be precise. So basically you want to find your OS, and you can either download the zip file, which you have to simply extract, and then you have Blender working, or you can get an installer. Whichever one you prefer, you go with. I'm not going to guide you through the actual installation process because it's technically just clicking next, 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 and choose the directory where you want to install Blender. But if you have any queries, just pop a comment below. But now one of the great things about Blender is actually that it is updated constantly. There's many people that are developing it, and it's not really necessarily their job, but it's their passion. It's what they do in their free time, and it gives the user, like ourselves, great advantages. And the way to take advantage of the constant changes and developments is you want to download daily builds, or builds that have been much more recent, because the official downloads here are just the stable, most recent version. But to get the most out of Blender, you can click right here, which is kind of hidden, which is actually somewhat sad, download daily builds, and it will take you to this website, or this link. And here you can see you have the exact same selection of operating systems and 32 versus 64-bit versions, but simply they are much more recent builds, and you'll notice this in the build number versus the build number of the other ones. And so some of these might be buggy and might have issues with them, but if you're able to cope with that, and you can handle a couple more crashes of Blender, then that's perfectly fine, and go with these and experiment with some of the new features. In addition to daily builds that are provided by Blender itself or by the Blender organization, there's also a great website called graphical.org. Again, the description will be in the link below. The URL will be in the description below. Sorry about that. And what Graphical provides is user custom builds. The other ones are done by developers, but on Graphical you have users and just people that are all coming together, usually also developers, that are putting in add-ons, different extensions, and so on into versions of Blender, which you can download also for free. And again, some of these might be buggy, might have issues, but if you're looking for custom CUDA kernels for graphics card rendering, or for a whole complete add-on package, just flip through the pages here. Again, heads up for your operating system and your 32 versus 64-bit operating system. Depends on what you have. You want to get the right version, and you can just click on one of them and then see. I'm downloading something right now, so that's why the internet's a little bit slow, but then see what's in it, and comments of people that have downloaded it. So this is a really great resource to use. And this pretty much covers downloading and installing Blender in that sense, and understanding how open source software works. And next we're going to jump into Blender, and I'm going to start explaining you some of the great features about Blender and its multi-view user interface. As I've mentioned before, the Blender version really does make a big difference, and the updates constantly change. In case you're curious, you can see here on the splash screen that I'm using Blender version 2.63, and the build number is R46646, in case you want to get the exact same build. That would make no sense though, because it is a slightly outdated build, maybe 1 month or 2 months old, yet still the latest general version 2.63. By simply right-clicking anywhere on the screen, you can get rid of the splash screen, and we can dive into the multi-view possibilities of Blender. And what I mean by multi-view is what you can immediately see is that you have a large 3D view right in the center here. And on the right-hand side, you have properties and things you can change in your scene. And above this, you have a little view here, which shows you the different objects in your scene. And the last view that is by default in Blender is a timeline in the bottom here, which you can see, which you can use for animation. Now the way you can really customize Blender, and it's great that it can do that, is you can change your views around depending on what you're doing. So let's say you're not animating anything, but you want to go into advanced materials in your render engine, and you want to use nodes. So simply you can just scale this up to make it as big as you like in all the dimensions, and change the view. And the way you change views of these windows or editors is by clicking the left in the bottom left. You click on a little expansion, and then let's just, for all intents and purposes, choose node editor, and immediately you'll see that we get loads of options, or that we get a different view here. And you can do this to get to let's make it a UV image editor. We can go through all of the different editors and put them in different windows. And this also works for the ones on the side here. And you can even, let's say you only have one object in your entire scene and you don't need the outliner because it's taking up space. Well, you can easily just expand the properties over the space of the outliner by hitting one of those arrows in the sides and just dragging it up. And when you see one area shaded darker and a large area from a non-shaded editor or view pointing into that, you'll note that the bottom, in this case, will take up the top. And this way you can easily expand this in case you need more space for options. Because once you start unfolding all of these, you'll even have to scroll up and down inside of this editor. Of course, this also works in different dimensions, and you can also split screens this way. So let's say down here we're currently using the UV image editor, and now let's say beside this window we want to go back to our node editor. So what we can simply do is grab this handy arrow again and just drag it over to the left, and you can see it creates another view, which are, without interfering with the top 3D view, creates another view here. And let's just pop down and grab our node editor. And so now you can see that you can really customize Blender in any way you like to suit your needs. And this is what makes it a truly outstanding tool. Now that I've covered the multi-view possibilities and options of Blender, we're going to jump into the next little topic of this video, which is the 3D view and finding your way around it. So without having changed anything right now, I'm going to show you how to move around in the 3D view. And this is actually a really handy thing. In case you're only working on one window, you can simply press Shift and Spacebar, and it will maximize this window into your entire Blender program. And what you saw happen in the bottom left hand corner is Blender showed to you guys, to the viewers, what I just pressed. So let me do it again. You can see it says Shift plus Space. So for any clicks or any keyboard combinations that I do, it will show them to you. So in case you're following this video closely, you can just do the exact same thing, and you should be getting the same results. Let's just do that again to maximize the window. And so this here is our 3D space. And basically on the left hand side you have just object tools, and which you can hide or pop up with T. And on the right hand side, which are now minimized, you can also maximize or pop or make visible with N some more options. Let's just get rid of both of these for now, just for the ease of navigating the 3D space. And the general rules of moving around in 3D space are you can zoom in and zoom out by using your scroll wheel on your mouse, and you can move around or change your view by holding down your scroll wheel or your middle mouse button and simply moving your mouse. This way you can go underneath, up and above, or into any view that you like of your 3D world. Now, what is if you want to, view over something over here? Well, you can hold Shift and then move your mouse. And for some reason that is not recording, so sorry about that, but holding Shift is like a pan. And I have no idea why it is giving me the little wait wheel, because my machine is definitely fast enough to handle Blender. And different to, let's say, most other programs, you select objects with a right click. And if I left click, I'm moving the 3D cursor. You can see that this little thingy with a kind of like a crosshair and a circle is the 3D cursor, while right clicking will highlight, in this case, the lamp, the camera, or the cube. And since I now misplaced the 3D cursor in my 3D space, a combination to always remember is Shift S and then snap cursor to center, and in this case it would be in the middle of all the axes. And now talking a little bit about the axes. In 3D space or in 3D softwares, it's all about the different axes, because there are 3 dimensions in everything in the 3D software, like the name says. And understanding what you're doing in each dimension is extremely important while editing an object or modeling something. So basically, this is the y-axis, the x-axis, and the z-axis, or z-axis depending on where you're from. And you can move anything or change anything in either 1 or 2 of these dimensions, or all of them at the same time if you like. And that's important to keep in mind when you're editing an object, especially, is in which axis do you want to change it. You want to keep it at the same on, let's say, the y-axis, and only modify it on the x. Excuse me, I just hit the microphone. And this basically covers the navigation in the 3D view space. And now we're going to get into some modes of editing objects or of the 3D space. So object and edit mode, and how to do basic deformations of objects in Blender. Actually, excuse me, before we move on to editing objects, I forgot to mention something very important about the 3D view space, and that is orthographic versus perspective modes. So I showed you how to move around views, but how to get exact views is something that's built straight into Blender. And this is very handy if you have a number pad on your keyboard, or you're using a laptop that also has a number pad. And if you don't have that, you can go to View on the bottom left-hand corner and choose the views with your mouse. Although you can see that most of these view keys are on your number pad. So right now in the top left-hand corner, you can see we're in user perspective mode. And I'll explain the difference of perspective versus orthographic mode in a second. But just to show you guys the views, if you press your 1 on number pad, you'll go into a front view, 3 for a right or side view, and 7 for a top view. And you can also get the exact opposites of each view by holding Control. Control 1 would, instead of the front view, make the back view. Control 3 would do the left perspective side view, and Control 7 would be the bottom view. So let's just go back to just using our middle mouse button and just going back to a view like we're accustomed to see. And now the difference between perspective and orthographic view. So perspective is what our human eye would see. It would see a 3-dimensional shape, and there's distortion lines in the distance, and it's like we would see things. But when in 3D software, when we're editing objects, basically we don't want to have that, because our eyes, they're great, but they cheat us sometimes. So when I would be editing something, it might look like I'm only editing something on the y-axis, but I'm not. I'm completely deforming the object. And what we have orthographic view for is basically a razor thin slice through our entire model, and which is a completely flat perspective. There is no three-dimensionality whatsoever. And the way we go into ortho or orthographic view is by pressing 5 on a number pad. And immediately you'll say, oh, but that's distorted. And yes, but this is what it would look like in a way without 3D. But orthographic isn't really great when you're in a view like this. It only really starts to make a difference once you're in one of those predefined views. So if we go to view number, or if you go to front view, you'll immediately see, and zoom in a little bit, you'll immediately see that there's grid lines in the back, and that's because everything is lined up. There's no more distortion, because let's just go out of orthographic just to show you guys. Right now you have this three-dimensionality, you only see the front face, and everything towards the back becomes smaller. If I go back to orthographic, you'll see that everything is like a straight tube. Well, that's because it's a cube. It goes back straight and there's no distortion. And this is extremely useful if you're editing only in 2 dimensions, or you want to be exactly certain of how close objects are to one another without having to calculate the little errors your eye makes or the deceivances. And of course, all the views that I showed you guys before apply to orthographic as well. So 3 for side, 7 for top, and control 1, 3, and 7 for the back, left, and bottom views. Now that I've quickly shown you the differences between orthographic and perspective, I'm going to jump into, like I said before, into editing objects and why orthographic makes such a big difference. Alright, so coming to the second last part or section of this video, the different modes, object and edit mode. Right now you can see that I'm in object mode down here in this little tab. If I hit this once, you can see I can go to edit mode and 4 other modes, which we're not going to actually focus on today at all. But these modes all do their own respective things. Let's just go into edit mode for now. And immediately you'll see that our cube has gotten a completely different look. Suddenly there's individual vertices that make up our shape, and there's faces in between them. And you can actually select edges if you like by hitting edge here, by selecting edges, or even entire faces by clicking on the face tool here. And by pressing Control Tab, if I'm not mistaken, you can also select vertex, edge, or face select mode from a keyboard shortcut without having to always move your mouse down here. Let's take the vertices for now though, and the principles of any operating system is by Shift you can select multiple ones, and by keeping Shift pressed and selecting them again, it deselects them. And you can see that if I select these 4 vertices, it automatically highlights this face, which, since the face is in between all these 4 vertices, it is part of that. I could also just go to face select and select this face, and if I would go back to vertice mode, I would have those 4 vertices highlighted again because they are all connected. Now, but an easy way to deselect everything is A. So with A, I would now have nothing selected, and by pressing A again, I would select everything. So it's kind of like the Control A or Control A to deselect everything in an operating system, or at least in Windows. Just you have to press A. And this is helpful if you're selecting like 2 vertices, you're doing something with them, and you don't want to have to deselect them manually. You just press A and you're back to having nothing selected. Now that I've kind of showed to you what you can do in edit mode when it comes to selecting, let's go into the basic deformation and editing of an object. So the most used keys or transformations are, well, move, scale, and rotate. So let's just start with move. So let's just select these 2 vertices, and let's press G because G is the shortcut for move, and let's just do something with them. And you can immediately see we're in perspective mode, that it moved them on the x-axis, so it moved them over here. It moved them on the y-axis, or sorry, it moved them on the y-axis this way, on the x-axis this way, and on the z-axis it moved them up. So what is if, let's say, you only want to move them on one of the axes? So let's just do Control Z to undo, and let's press G again, and you can immediately see now I can just move my mouse and they go all over the place. But now let's say I only want to move them on the x-axis. So I press X, and you can see it locks it to the x-axis. I can also press Y. I would move them on the Y, or the Z to move them on the Z. So I just stick to X and move them over here. But now let's say, I want to move them somewhere over here, but I don't want them to change height. So you can also do that, and you don't select two axes, but you do the inverse. So let's say I don't want to move the height, so you do Shift Z, which locks it to all the axes but Z. So now I can move it over here, and I can move it around, and it still stays on the same level. And this is where orthographic view comes in really handy. In orthographic view, and let's just go undo this one stage, we go to top view. Since there is no three-dimensionality in the orthographic view, there is no way I can possibly edit the object on the z-axis. The only thing I can do is just by doing a simple move with, or a simple transform with G. I can move it, and you can see the height hasn't changed. And the best way to actually check this is to use one of the predefined orthographic views. You can see that this line is completely level. Don't trust your eyesight, but you know that you've only modified it on the x and y axes and not on the z axis. So that much about axes and transformations or editing on these axes. But let's also get into the other most common mode, so scale. So let's say we want to make this object not so well thin in comparison, but much broader, or at least these two vertices. So let's just press S, and you can see it will scale them. But let's go to a different view, and you can see that it only scales them on these two axes automatically. Well, because they only go on these axes. But once again, you can tell it to only scale on the y-axis, just to be certain. And let's scale this up. And selecting axes works in every single that editing mode that I've encountered so far. There's some that are just general, but for all the basic ones, you can always select axes. Basically, that's it for scale. You can scale in different dimensions as well. And the last, but definitely not least tool would be rotate. Rotate, the keyboard shortcut is R. And let's say we don't see, because now it would just do something wild rotate. Just right click to undo that, and hit rotate to only rotate on the z-axis. And this way it would lock the transformation to be on a z-axis. Let's just drop it like this. And this way, it wouldn't rotate anything on the y-axis or the z-axis. And this way you can get a relatively clean model without too much effort. So now that I've given you a basic introduction to edit mode and some of the simple transformations you can do, let's just go out of edit mode, and this is actually another shortcut. Instead of having to go down here and go to object mode, you can just hit tab. And with tab, you're back into object mode, and you can see that your object has been changed in shape, and here you can no longer select individual vertices. You can simply move the object still, or do the other rotate, scale, or move transformations just for the entire object. So that's the ending of this section, and next we're going to get into saving Blender files, and a great feature that Blender includes. So the traditional way of saving a file is, file, save as, and you have one version, and then you save it over that, and then you have one version, and if you mess up in a version, you can't really go back because you just saved it. Well, Blender has a really smart thing it does, and without going to file and everything, you just press Ctrl S, and it'll let you choose where you want to save it. So I've already created a folder for the introduction video, and since I've already tried or made a video before, let's just name this 02. It'll automatically add the .blend extension, and let's just hit enter again to save it. You can see up here it now also has a name. But now, let's say I would be editing this object like crazy, and I just hit Control S, and you can see it doesn't say save as or save, but save over. So let's just hit this 2 times to demonstrate it nicely, and let's quickly go into the folder that I've saved them in. and you can see now that it's actually created 3 individual files. So disregard these 3. You can see that we have the blend file, we have a blend 1 and blend 2 file. And the way, well, blend 1 or just blend is always the most recent. So if you made changes that you've done most recently, it would be in the blend file. So you double click on this, it'll open with Blender and you can keep working. But let's say you messed up here. You can always go back like 2 iterations of saving to go back to blend 2. I mean, I haven't made any changes now, but you can go back to the blend 2 file, open that, and do another way of working without messing up in that sense. And this is really great, and you can change how many iterations it saves. You know, you can do up to like 20 or you know, pretty, I think endless even versions. You'll have a lot of files in the end, but it means that you're pretty dead safe. And once in a while, as a good practice, just save it as a new version. So do 0.1, and then, you know, after like an hour after you think, you know, your day is over, you do a 0.2. So you're not always working on the same file. It's also you know, a more physical backup than the Blender iterations. And that's my phone. I'll be back in a second. So yeah, sorry about that. My phone just rang and it was an important call, so I just had to take it. And basically back to what I was saying, you know, saving is always a good thing. And that pretty much covers what I wanted to say. And in the next video, which I'll be uploading in a couple of weeks because I'm going to be gone, we're going to start covering, you know, just some basic modeling, creating some work, maybe some moving towards a stage where you can create work like you've seen in the first picture of this video. And I hope you guys have enjoyed. If you want to see more videos like this, pop a comment below, like and favorite it, and if you are looking forward to more future content, you know, feel free to subscribe. Thanks for watching. Take care.